Welcome back to Overtime here on WOTM. Mark, one of the things that dominates college football or dominates December is all those big college football bowl games, but then we also started to get ratcheted up for conference games in basketball. Alabama and Auburn had a really good non-conference part of their schedule, had to weather some ups and downs through it. However, they both did so, both top 25 teams. We'll start with the top 10 poll where Auburn finds itself. Alabama has been here over the course of the first few weeks of the season. But there is Auburn right there, sitting there at number 9 with only one loss on the year. Baylor, your defending national champion, still number 1 overall. What's your takeaways as we take a look at both your first 10 and your 11 through 25?
Baylor is a national champion, and Baylor last year, everyone thought Gonzaga was going to be the team to beat. They were, and Baylor kind of snuck in there and won a national championship. You see how the Baylor football program is going, and Baylor has a past that maybe they shouldn't be so proud of. So I think a lot of these things are healing, and to see their basketball team top of where it is, and their football team, beating Ole Miss the way they did in a bowl game. I think all those things kind of add together. So it's nice to see them up at 13-0. I think they're definitely one of the best college basketball. It's not a fluke that they're there or that they won a national championship last year. Duke is always going to be there. Purdue, it's nice to see them representing the Big Ten because I remember Purdue usually always being a solid factor in the Big Ten all those years with Gene Cady. So I appreciate that. UCLA, when UCLA is good, usually that's good for college basketball because they're like what Alabama kind of is to football. Arizona is another team in the Pac-12 that's really good, and Southern Cal. A lot of Pac-12 teams in this top 10 list.
Exactly. They'll go through 11 through 20. That's where Alabama finds themselves. Now 12-3 on the year, but some other SEC teams making some noise this year. Talk about a team like Kentucky, a perennial power. Tennessee also finds themselves there, as well as LSU. I think it's going to be a really good year in the conference, but you mentioned different conferences, different leagues with a lot of teams in it. The Pac-12 obviously having a good start to the basketball season. You have some of the teams in the Big Ten having a really good start to the basketball season as well as the SEC.
Yeah, well, you have Ohio State and Wisconsin. They're in the Big Ten. But the SEC here with LSU and Tennessee, two of the teams that we're going to talk about, breaking down Auburn and Alabama. LSU was undefeated. Now, they didn't play that great a schedule.
For sure.
And they really have some challenges offensively. But they're going to be a team to reckon with. And Kentucky, like we said, that's the X factor. Kentucky usually is the best team, and there's no doubt about it. They're not that anymore. They've kind of come back to the pack, but they still have a reputation that's hard to ignore when you go in there and play. There's a certain level of intimidation that you have to fact. So we'll see how the other teams do that and where they rank overall in the SEC East. I expect Alabama and Auburn to be the two top teams in the SEC West. There's some other teams, maybe Arkansas can jump up, but I don't really see any other teams really being as consistent or having the players. I mean, Walker Kessler, to me, is a Player of the Year candidate. And Jabari Smith, you throw him in there too. So you have some really good players on Alabama and Kentucky.
Exactly.
Excuse me, Alabama and Auburn.
And Auburn, And we'll start with the Auburn Tigers. We'll quickly dive into both games. Both teams played a team that is ranked in the polls, both then and now. Auburn got off to a really quick start against LSU and picked up a win there.
Well, they held LSU without a field goal for the first 10 minutes and 46 seconds. They missed their first 16 shots, including 11 from three-point range. Kessler, 16 points, 10 rebounds, 11 blocks. First Auburn player get a triple-double since Kenny Gabriel back in January of 2012, so almost 10 years. They held LSU, check this, only 4 assists and 17 turnovers.
Wow.
Absolutely dominated defensively. And you saw there were times when LSU just had no idea what to do to attack offensively because Kessler was back there swatting shots like King Kong.
Exactly.
So they're really, and plus with Auburn's ability to shoot three-pointers, Jabari Smith, I think offensively is one of the best players in the conference. And Kessler just does so many good things offensively. You see how Auburn, a lot of how they run their offense is off of those picks at top. Auburn is one of the best teams in college basketball at setting picks.
Exactly. And Alabama, meanwhile, start off with a great game against Tennessee. I think this is a Bama basketball team that, obviously they've weathered some storms. They've played really well. They've kind of had an up and down year in the sense of like they've lost to Memphis team that's really good, lost to Iona, but then picked up huge wins. Win over Houston, win over Gonzaga, and a win over Tennessee.
Yeah, you want to see Alabama shoot the ball a little better because they're still not really shooting the ball as well as they can. But they ended the game on a 16-5 run. You had a great effort by the graduate transfer Noah Gurley, who came over from Furman, had a double-double. So when their big players aren't really stepping up, and but Davidson didn't really have that good a game. Shackelford is having some problems shooting the ball, but you got a guy like Gurley stepping up against Tennessee, who you got to remember didn't play without Fulkerson or Kennedy Chandler.
Right.
So you got to factor that in too. But Alabama, when they played home, they've won I think 17 straight at home. So they're going to be tough to beat there. And a team like Tennessee, when they're down 2 guys, in a game that was very inconsistent for Alabama. Offensively, I mean, they lost to Davidson the game before that. So they're still trying to find their way. And like I said, they're really not shooting the ball that well. I expect those 2 things to get better as the season goes on. But the one thing Alabama does do every game is they'll bring a solid defensive effort. They brought it again against Tennessee, and that's the one thing that they have. They're one of the best defensive teams in basketball.
Nate Oates said it. When we play good defense, we're a really good basketball team. If not, we can get beat by just about anybody. They play really good defense for back-to-back games now. Meanwhile, in and around the state, it's not just Alabama and Auburn. There's some really good basketball teams being played around the state of Alabama on the men's side. UAB already off to a nice 12-3 start, led by Andy Kennedy out of Conference USA. Sanford's already gone on and upset Ole Miss. Meanwhile, South Alabama is a team that played Jacksonville State not that long ago. Got a chance to watch the Jaguars. They have a whole bunch of players that transfer from SEC schools to that program. Wouldn't be a bit surprised to see them in March Madness. Troy also off to a nice start as well. And Jacksonville State struggling as far as the wins and losses go. However, they fielded a really good basketball team. Expect to see a lot of them.
They played Alabama tough too.
That's exactly right. Will play their first A-Sun game coming up a little bit later this week. Meanwhile, games around the state this week. Both Alabama and Auburn, after home games to start the SEC schedule, will go on the road, South Carolina and Florida. Meanwhile, on the 5th, Sanford's at Mercer. Then on the 6th, the trio of games is UAB goes to North Texas, Troy at home against Coastal Carolina, and South Alabama at home against Appalachian State. And a home matchup, in-state matchup between Jacksonville State and North Alabama on Saturday, January the 8th, as we now get into the thick of conference play here in college basketball. Well, coming up next here on Overtime, we'll talk a little bit more college football. We'll also dive into the NFL as the playoff picture starting to take some shape. We'll talk about it coming up next.